Hello and welcome to episode 705 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, and March Madness is upon us while Tom and Jane from accounting are blindly filling out their bracket on gut feels and mascots. We are here to find an edge and win in one of America's great gambling events. To talk all things March Madness bracket pools today, I'm joined by three men you know and love. Jason Lisk of Pool Genius, aka Team Rankings. Jack Miller, you know him from our NFL team, but he is a closet college basketball freak. And Alex Harden, you know him from our college football team, but he is another college basketball freak. More on that in a second. On today's show, we're going to talk about how to win March Madness pools. That means both the optimal strategy that we want to employ and then also how it applies to this year's tournament specifically. For the first time ever, we are launching a March Madness, meaning projected ownership for every player in every March Madness game. Plus, Alex will be dropping player prop notes in Discord. We'll also have shows. So if you're interested in that, head to EstablishTheRun.com now and find the college basketball tab. All the information is there. Let's get into it here with some general strategy quickly. I think we've been over this. We've done this show 3 or 4 times. We've written articles about it. I don't want to go too deep into the overall strategy here today, but I just wanted, for anyone who has not listened in previously, the overarching strategy is simple in these. Everyone knows there are a ton of upsets in March Madness, but everyone is also, or most people are wildly overconfident in their ability to pinpoint those upsets. So I've had a bunch of success, just to take an extreme example, in smaller field March Madness pools by simply projecting out the betting favorite, not the seeding favorite, the betting favorite, projecting that out for every game and just picking that. I mean, think about that. How many gambling events can you take the betting favorite, every single spot and still be contrarian? You know, it's incredible. Now, obviously, there's more to it than that as we get deeper here. I think, Jason, we should start here. The first thing I think we need to do is figure out what our opponents are doing. What are our opponents picking in their brackets every step of the way? How should we figure that out? Where do you get pool pick data? And then also, do you have feel on maybe some sleepers that the public might be on at a higher rate than they should be? So yeah, Jason, what do you think about finding this data that we need?
Yeah, I mean, we compile it at Pool Genius. So if you are one of our subscribers, we'll have that data. We're working on it. We're getting the early data now. Obviously, different sites. Some publish the data, like ESPN. You might be able to see if you're in on the contest what people are picking relative to each game. If you go through it, there are a variety of pool hosting sites that have data. It takes a bit of a grind to find it, but you can generally view it. And if you get in a large enough pool, they generally behave like public pick data. I mean, unless you're in like a really skewed pool with all alumni from one school, or, you know, a very small pool where it's just unpredictable how 30 people will pick, you can generally rely on the public pick data. For sure.
And what we're trying to do with this public pick data is take it and then also figure out win probability. So the probability X team will advance to the Sweet 16, or the probability Y team will advance to Elite 8, and compare that to what people are doing. I think that the best way for people to do that is to find some public pick data that you trust, whether it's from Pool Genius or someone else, and then take the implied odds from sportsbooks for the odds to reach each of these rounds. There's more in-depth ways to do it using power ratings and stuff like that, but I think that is the quickest and dirtiest way to do it, and that's going to be everything for the pool here going forward. That is what the strategy that we want to employ. All right. Before going any further, I think injuries are an underrated thing. We talked about it a bunch on the show last year. I want to make sure, as someone who doesn't follow college basketball particularly close, like myself, Alex, that I'm not missing any big injuries here. Of course, that will be baked into market data. So like if you're using odds to make the Sweet 16, odds to make the Final Four, et cetera, it should be baked in there. But I still want to be aware of the injuries. Alex, anything that the people should know there?
Yeah, I have 3 big injury spots. First is Marquette and Tyler Kolak, who's missed the last 6 games with an oblique injury, which is kind of a tricky injury from what I understand. He's supposed to be back for the tournament, but he's really important to what they do as their point guard, go-to guy. They'll be fine without him versus Western Kentucky, but that second round matchup gets much tougher. So that's the first big spot I'm looking at. All reports suggest he'll be good to go, but will he be 100%? Not sure. Marquette's a 2 seed, so they really need him. Next spot is Kansas. They were down Hunter Dickinson and Kevin McCullough in the conference tournament. Dickinson dislocated his shoulder. Apparently, he's been practicing the last couple of days. He should be fine. Less news on McCullough, who's had a bone bruise on his knee. They're going to try to get him back as well. But this is a pretty shallow team. They need both of them to do any damage. They're a 4 seed. It's a pretty weak Kansas team this year, so it's not looking great for their prospects going into the tournament. And the last spot for me is Houston. Juwan Roberts hurt his shin in the Big 12 semifinals. Played in the finals, but didn't play the second half. It sounds like it's just like a pain tolerance thing, but he's really important to what they do. He's probably their second most important player behind Jamal Shedd at this point. And it's especially important because they've lost 3 of their key rotation pieces for the season this year, and Ramon Walker, Jojo Tugler, and Terrence Arsenault. So they're what was a really deep team coming into the year. They're pretty shallow at this point, and they're a 1 seed, one of the big favorites, but they can't afford to lose anyone. They definitely need Juwan Roberts back healthy.
Yeah, I mean, remember what happened last year? Houston lost in the Sweet 16 to Miami, which is a good transition to my next question, Jack, because last year it was a mess for the number 1 seeds. You remember Houston lost, I just mentioned. Alabama lost, I believe it was the Sweet 16 to San Diego State. Kansas lost early. Purdue didn't even win a game. I mean, it was ugly for number 1 seeds. We were still able to have a really good tournament, and a bunch of people sent notes just because North Carolina, who was being underpicked relative to their, UConn, who was being underpicked relative to their win probability, to their advanced probability in a bunch of rounds. So it looked really good in some of the advanced stuff, ended up making a really good run. But yeah, Jack, what do you think about this year's number 1 seeds compared to average or compared to last year?
Yeah, I think for most of the year and really the past month, 3 of the 1 seeds have really been locked into their place as the 1 seed. And I'd say those 3 are stronger than your average 1 seed. And that would be UConn, Houston, and Purdue. Ken Pom says that he doesn't recommend comparing adjusted efficiencies across years, but if you just do it as a quick and dirty way, you can see UConn, Houston, and Purdue all have better adjusted efficiency than what we're used to seeing from an average 1 seed. The 4th 1 seed is North Carolina. They kind of won it over the past week, it seems like, and then kind of won it because it seems like the committee did not really value what Iowa State did in the Big 12 conference tournament. They are weaker than your average 1 seed. They're still a good team. They're still 9th on Ken Pom. They are solid on both offense and defense. They have one of the best guards in the country in RJ Davis, but they are weaker than your average 1 seed. The other 3, I think, are just pretty much juggernauts. UConn has 5 guys who might be going to the NBA. Houston has an elite defense as always. They're not a great shooting team as usual, but they rebound their misses at an elite rate, and they have one of the best guard duos in the country in Jamal Shedd and LJ Cryer. Like Alex said, we do need to keep an eye on if Juwan Roberts is going to be at full health, especially once we get to the Sweet 16. And then Purdue has the 2-time National Player of the Year in Zach Edey. Their guards are a lot better than they were last year. Braden Smith has taken a massive, massive jump from where he was as a freshman. Lance Jones, who transferred in from Southern Illinois, has really been the second guard that they have been looking for. Great 2-way player. So I think those 3 teams, UConn, Houston, and Purdue, are better than your average 1 seed. North Carolina is probably worse than your average 1 seed, but they are by no means a fraud by any stretch of the imagination.
It seems like the public thinks UConn is like by far and away the best, not even close. And there's some initial ESPN pick data out there. 26.1% are picking UConn as the champ. Second favorite pick is Houston, all the way down at 12.2. Then North Carolina 11. Then Purdue at 8. That's going to change a lot as people start to fill in their picks. But yeah, people seem to think, and I don't know if you think it's warranted, Jason, that UConn is just like far and away the best.
I mean, I can tell you that we have UConn rated number 1 in the, like in Ken Pom and some of the advanced metrics. And if you just look at raw ratings over the course of the year, they're pretty close to Houston and Purdue. We have them kind of in their own tier, and then Purdue, Houston. And the reason for that is we talk about injuries now, but UConn has had injuries in the past, that where they had key players out and their performance was lower. When their full lineup, which they have right now, has been in, they've been dominant. They look like a dominant 1 seed. So that's why the market is where it is. The market has, I think, at least some of the market accounting for that, and that's what's pushing it up.
Yeah, And betting market, at least on FanDuel Sportsbook right now, Connecticut plus 400, Houston plus 600 to win it all, Purdue plus 700. Not a huge gap there, but then there is a big gap back to Arizona 15, North Carolina 16, Tennessee 16, Creighton 20. So yeah, a little bit of divergence there. Something to watch as more pick data comes in. All right, let's get into some specific teams that we think might be underrated. Jason, I'll start with you. Any teams come to mind that you think the public is going to pick at too low of a rate, aka underrated?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the round we're talking about. I think Arizona maybe once you get late, a little bit of a value play. Same with Auburn, and that's because the path they're on. You kind of have to commit. I don't think they're going to be undervalued early, but I think having UConn and Auburn in the same region is going to create maybe a little opportunity for both, like a high variance situation where whoever comes out of that might be the favorite. If one of those two is in the Elite Eight, might be the favorite to win the whole thing from that point on in the betting markets. Honestly, if you told me right now Auburn's in the Elite Eight, I might have them favored over everybody. For example, now it's going to be a slog to get there. Arizona's with North Carolina. I think North Carolina is going to be popular to some extent. Arizona, we have rated a little higher, and I think a lot of places do. They're kind of in the same tier, but as Jack said, this North Carolina team is not a clear number one. They were selected as the fourth number one because that's where the committee ended up. You could have easily justified Iowa State. Tennessee may have been the choice until they kind of spit up on themselves against Mississippi State in the SEC tournament. So it wasn't a clear choice. And then they were able to go out west. So I think there's maybe some there. And then, larger pools, there's value on teams like we talked Tyler Kolek, Marquette. Marquette at full strength is an intriguing one, but it's a risky one because of the Kolek thing. If he's close to 100%, I think Marquette's probably a value, but they're also a risk. So it depends on where your pool size and what kind of pool you're playing in. If something like that makes a big sense.
For sure. And, we won't get into the pool size stuff today, but I know most of you listening probably play DFS, that you can be more and more contrarian as the pool gets bigger and bigger, or at least need to be. To Jason's point, Arizona has actually 15 to 1 to win the national, to win it all, and North Carolina 16 to 1. So, Arizona is actually ahead in the betting market there. Alex, any underrated teams you wanted to point out here you think the public might not be picking at a high enough rate to go deep?
Yeah, one that sticks out to me is New Mexico as an 11 seed. They're actually a favorite over the 6 Clemson in the first round. I think those situations, like most bracket pools, you're never really, that 11 seed's never really going to get picked to the level that they should. So for me, in most bracket pools, that's kind of the layup situation. I'll just take that every time because a lot of the public pick data I've looked at so far had Clemson as picked at a higher rate straight up, and they're a dog. So I'll take that one. I think they could make it into the Sweet 16 as an 11. I think they're definitely underseeded. Committee did a real bad job with seeding this year, especially. So a lot of situations like that. New Mexico is my favorite one to kind of take advantage of. I could certainly see them making a Sweet 16 run.
Yeah, New Mexico, there's prices on New Mexico to make the Sweet 16 plus 250 right now. So like in practice, what I would do if I was trying to figure out how far I should pick New Mexico to go is I would devig the line, the yes/no line on them to make the Sweet 16, and then look at what that number is versus the number of people picking them to go to the Sweet 16. Jack, any underrated teams left these guys didn't mention that you like?
Yeah, I really like the New Mexico and Marquette calls. New Mexico especially, I also had them as my most underrated team. I don't think you have to in most pools take them to make the Sweet 16 because most people are probably going to force more upsets than necessary. We've talked about how it's optimal kind of just to go with the chalk, especially in smaller pools. But New Mexico is definitely very live, I think, to make the Sweet 16. BYU is another one where they are a 6 seed. Based on their metrics, they should be a 4 or 5 seed. And actually, according to the committee, they were the highest 5 seed. But because of their religion, they are not allowed to play on Sundays. And so they couldn't be a 5 seed. So they are a 6 seed. As an Illinois fan, I'm absolutely thrilled that in the second round we should be playing. We're getting a 6 seed team that the committee themselves said is a 5 seed, but I digress. The thing about BYU too is they shoot threes 50.7% of their possessions. It's the second highest mark in the country. So purely from like a game theory perspective, Threes are obviously a higher variance shot. So if we get a BYU versus a 1 seed, maybe there's some argument that the high variance style that BYU plays lends themselves more to an upset. It also makes them maybe more likely to be upset. And then this one, it's more of like a hypothesis. I'm curious to see what ends up happening, but I feel like the narrative around Purdue being chokers in March at this point is so strong. And from a numbers standpoint, they're pretty clearly a top 3 team in the country right now, according to ESPN at least. This will change in the next few days. But Purdue is being picked well behind North Carolina in terms of who people are picking to win the national championship. So I'm curious to see where Purdue's ownership comes in. I think, that's one where maybe you have to know your pool. But I think that if you're in a pool with, Big Ten fans maybe, but not Purdue fans, that Purdue could come in underowned because people think that they just can't get it done in March.
That was the one I was going to say. As someone who doesn't like follow the players and everything closely, just the narrative that I've felt out there from people is Purdue's going to choke it off again. Like Purdue's a bunch of chokers and they can't play in March. And yeah, so I thought that one was interesting. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I had a stat on the Mexico thing we discussed.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Now, small sample size alert. But there have only been 11 times since 2011, an 11 seed or worse has been the favorite in round 1. That is basically the betting market disagrees strongly with the bracketing by the committee. And those teams are 10-1 straight up and against the spread. 9 of them won by double digits. Basically, in the recent past, when teams have been favored but have not been the better seed, they have been really good. We're talking teams like Gonzaga, Wichita State that get favored, things like that. And I think you have that situation here where this New Mexico team was rated in KenPom. They turn people over. They have great guard play. They are a potential, and they're hot.
Yeah.
And so all those things are factoring in here. And Clemson did not look good in the ACC tournament.
I think related to that is there's public money betting the tournament for sure, and they're going to bet on seed a lot, because they think that the committee knows what they're doing. Alex already took his turn as an official college basketball bro to rip the committee. It's a rite of passage. If you're a college basketball bro, you have to rip the committee seedings. It's written into the contract.
Dude, this year was an outlier in how bad it was. Like I don't care if teams get left out. Like there's 64 teams, figure out a way to get in. Like the seedings, whatever. But this year especially, it just stuck out as being odd.
Yeah, I saw a headline on ESPN, like a couple teams like refused NIT. They're so mad that they refused NIT bids and stuff. Everybody's always complaining. Anyways, we did underrated. Let's go to overrated. I'll start with Jason once again. Any teams you think that people will be picking at too high of a rate here this season?
I mean, you got to make stands somewhere to win contests like this, right? You got to make stands. You can't pick everybody in every bracket. North Carolina, for me, is probably that team, and there's some reasons for that. They aren't a dominant one, and a lot of times in the recent past, if you have faded the non-dominant ones, you've done really well. Xavier a few years ago is an example that comes out. This team isn't rated nearly as bad as that. On the overall season, North Carolina's numbers are good. They're not dominant, but their defensive numbers are good. Their defensive numbers have not been good recently, though. NC State lit them up. They've had like 3 or 4 really poor games where teams have shot high effective field goal percentages on both 2s and 3s against them. So there's some vulnerability there. And they had more results that were more like, they lost to like the equivalent of like an 8 seed to an NIT seed type team than the other top teams have. But then you add their path. People may look at it, but Michigan State, Mississippi State's lurking. I don't know who's going to win that game. These teams have been wildly inconsistent. Michigan State is where they are because they're like 2 and 200 in close games when they need a basket and when they need something. But they're rated in the top 20 in KenPom for a reason. They've played effectively. They almost beat Purdue. I mean, almost doesn't count in seeding usually, but you have a lot of teams like this Michigan State team or this Mississippi State team that get in, get a second chance, and are underseeded on their quality. That's a tough matchup no matter who wins. So it's not like they have one team, but if that team gets knocked off, they're okay. They could lose to either of those teams, and so their path gets tough early. Yeah. I think in a way that UConn's path is tough later, but it's not in the second round. I don't see the 8-9s in their region presenting the problems that North Carolina is going to have.
Yeah, and to Jason's point, you can bet North Carolina to make the Sweet 16. Yes is only minus 205. No is plus 164. So, I mean, we're talking like a huge percent of the time, the betting market already doesn't even have North Carolina winning 2 games, around like 65, 70% of the time. Alex, I'll go to you next for your overrated teams in this tournament.
Yeah, I have South Carolina as being overrated. I love their freshman Colin Murray Boyles, but they're second in luck rating on KenPom out of 363 teams. So it basically just looks at game-to-game efficiencies versus their actual results. So despite being a 6 seed, they're only 49th on KenPom, 47th on Bartorvik. I think they're in for an early exit. Second team, I have to go with Purdue. I don't think they're going to get upset early. I think they're going to make the Sweet 16, but I always just view their play style with Edey as a little bit gimmicky, and things tend to go off the rails at some point. I just don't believe in them as a team that can make a Final Four run, but I would be really surprised if they didn't make the second weekend.
Yeah, they're minus 430 to make the Sweet 16. And then as you keep getting further, Purdue, actually, that's not up yet, Purdue to make the Final Four, but Purdue national champion, they are 7-1, the third choice here. Jack, overrated teams for you in this tournament.
Yeah, I think that the ones that have been named for late runs are good so far, except for, I guess, Purdue, which I think they could be underrated. So I'll focus on the early rounds. Clemson, I think they play New Mexico, so it's kind of just the opposite stance of that, but they're around 3.5 point dogs right now, and they're being picked in the majority of brackets on ESPN. Duquesne as an 11 seed, I don't think they have a huge chance to win against BYU, who should be a 5 seed. Duquesne also is probably overseeded as an 11 seed. Utah State is going to be dogs to TCU. I think that as an 8-9 game maybe could be 50-50, although people are picking TCU right now, so we'll see where the ownership goes. And then, as Jason mentioned, the 8 and 9 seed that UConn are going to play in the second round, Northwestern and Florida Atlantic are both pretty weak according to the metrics for their seed line. Northwestern also has one of their best players, Ty Berry, who's been out for the past month or so and is out for the year. That's partially baked into the metrics since he's been out for so long. But yeah, those are, I think, some teams that are probably going to be overrated. And those are primarily teams that aren't going to make a deep run. So they're not the most important teams to pick against, but still.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I think we should go region by region now and just talk quickly about each one. I'll give each of you guys a chance to talk about one of them. Jason, we'll start with the East, where, like I said, UConn is the overwhelming favorite. UConn is plus 110 to come out of the East, then Iowa State plus 400, Auburn plus 500, Illinois plus 800. Just from the earliest pick data, it seems like UConn is going to be picked at a massive rate to make the Final Four. What do you think about that? And then any contrarian takes in the East?
Yeah, UConn's going to be picked, I think, is going to be quite popular. It's just a question of how far you take them. You're running a risk if you take them, knock them out early, and then they go on a run, you're kind of toast. I think you mentioned earlier, I'll just go off on a quick tangent. You mentioned earlier how UConn as a value saved a lot of the top picks from last year, and that's the case. Like if it's a crazy bracket, all you got to do is have the one team. You don't have to have the craziness. You could have won a bracket with Purdue winning last year if you're with 10 friends, because nobody else got those points either. And so the lesson here, what burns you is like you don't pick the 2 seed that goes all the way to the final. That and other people had them. That's what burns you. And so the risk with UConn is, when do you get off that train? Because you can't jump off too early. Now, I do think Auburn is an interesting one. Auburn can turn people over. They're deep. They rate highly in metrics. They did not play well necessarily against the very elite offenses. Their worst performances against Kentucky, against Florida, teams that are elite offenses and maybe not as great defensively, but could score against their pressure. And UConn can certainly do that at full strength. Iowa State can defend the heck out of the ball. That'll be a great matchup. I'm kind of fading Illinois here. We already talked about their style. We've seen teams like them. Ohio State 2 years ago, offensively skewed, don't turn people over, bad defensive metrics, get popped early in the tournament. I think they're a risk. But yeah, I like Auburn or Iowa State if it's not UConn in this region.
Jason has just disparaged your laundry. He has said that your laundry is not that good. Do you agree? They're down to, I saw there's a line move as I was looking here. Illinois is down to plus 750 to come out of this region. I need to get your laundry bro take before we move on Illinois.
Yeah, I honestly don't necessarily disagree. I think UConn, Iowa State, and Auburn are the strongest of their respective seed lines, which is typical for Illinois in March to get hit with teams that are way underseeded.
Here we go. Hey, everybody's got to bitch. There's got to be some bitching from everyone about the seedings. It's
but I mean, at this, I'm hoping we make a Sweet 16 just to stop the narratives against Brad Underwood. But I would also be surprised if we come out of this region.
All right. I'm going to go to Alex for the Midwest because he is among what I expect to be many people who don't believe in Purdue. Purdue plus 175 here. Tennessee plus 310. Creighton plus 500. Kansas 750. Gonzaga plus 1,000. Jack, I'll go to South next with you. But Alex, on the Midwest here, if it's not Purdue, how can we smartly shape our Midwest brackets?
Yeah, this is a tough one because they kind of rolled out the red carpet for Purdue to kind of waltz into the Elite Eight. So I don't really see anything on the top half. Like Kansas is a pretty weak 4 in my opinion this year. I think Purdue makes the Elite Eight. It's just when they get into those matchups. I mean, I like Creighton a bit in the bottom of the region, and Tennessee is always a tough out. So for me, I think Creighton's the team that I kind of want to make a stance on in this region to make a bit of a run. They're another team that doesn't play very deep. Like they definitely cannot sustain an injury to one of their top guys, but they have like a guard, Trey Alexander, who's awesome, big man in Kalkbrenner, who can, they run a lot of drop coverage. So they are susceptible to like an elite guard taking advantage of them. But I like their pieces. Baylor Shireman, good rebounding guard, shoot the 3. I like the pieces there for them to be able to make a deep run. So probably end up having them come out of this region as a 3, and that's probably the only region I will have a 3 or higher coming out.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really interested in the pick data there because I think that's going to be an important one to see how many people are picking Purdue. That's going to shape what I do there in that bracket. In the South, Jack, we have Houston plus 140. Now, I think the narrative to a lot of people is Houston is just some small school who doesn't play anyone. That's not true. Some of the stuff I've looked at, Houston has like a top 5 strength of schedule against. I don't know if that's right or not, but it seems like Houston has played a ton of very good teams this year and obviously performed very, very well. They are, again, the favorite there. Jack, what do you think about the South?
Yeah, so this year's a little different on Houston because they moved up to the Big 12. So they played one of the hardest schedules in the country. They won the Big 12. So I think that's going to probably quiet that narrative a good amount. I think in most of the pools I'm in, I will be picking Houston just because I think that picking favorites, especially when those favorites have the analytical profile to back up the seed that they're getting, makes a lot of sense. Like we talked about a little bit earlier, Marquette is pretty dangerous, assuming Kolek is healthy. And it seems like this has kind of been Marquette's plan all along, was to rest Kolek for the conference tournament, make sure he's at 100% for the real thing. Kentucky has that same kind of analytical profile that Jason talked about with Illinois, where they're really, really good at offense. Their defense is severely lacking. So that type of mold historically has not done very well. So I don't think that I'll be picking them to go very far. I think pretty confidently Marquette over them in the Sweet 16. And it looks like right now the majority of people on ESPN are picking Kentucky in that matchup, so they might not be a bad fade. Duke looks like a pretty good 4 seed. They're 8th on KenPom, seeded 4. But at the same time, I think in most pools, it's probably just not necessary to take them. I think you can probably just ride Houston, who seems like a very legit, above average 1 seed with the best defense in the country, great guard play. Like we talked about it earlier, but it's important to monitor if Juwan Roberts is going to be healthy enough to play. I think he will be, especially for the round of 32 onward. But that's kind of how I'm viewing the South right now.
I mean, it's interesting. If you're in a pool with like a lot of casual people, this South region has Duke and Kentucky, who are like the two biggest name values that casual college basketball fans or people who just show up for March Madness could pick and will pick, I think. And they don't want to pick Houston, I don't think, especially after what happened last year to Houston as a number 1 seed. So, yeah, I think that one is interesting. Last one here, Jason, the West. This one is the most wide open. Again, Arizona is actually favored to come out of this region, not North Carolina. So last I saw it was Arizona plus 260, North Carolina plus 350, Baylor 650, Bama 650, St. Mary's 10-1 to come out of the West here. Jason, what do you think people do in the West, and what do you think is the right way to think about this region?
Man, this region is, I think, collectively the weakest of all of them. And so I think this is probably one of the ones where you could get a little creative depending on your pool size. You could do some stuff. I didn't even discuss Alabama when you talked overrated, because I spent time on North Carolina, but this Alabama team is just imploding on defense, just imploding. I've been playing against them just on game picks over the last 3 weeks, and they've just been getting torched by teams, including in the SEC tournament game. They remind me as a Chiefs fan of back when the Trent Green teams couldn't force teams to punt. That's what Alabama. That's the football version of this Alabama team. They are high scoring, and I think they're going to struggle to get stops. So you got a 1 seed in North Carolina, a 4 there. Michigan State's actually our 3rd highest power rated team in this region, which is crazy as an 8. But they're not that much above everybody else. It's just a jumbled mess. Mm-hmm. Any team, you told me any team from 1 through 11 came out of this region, I'd probably buy it. I think Arizona's the play in most bracket pools because you're playing against North Carolina's somewhat probably a little higher popularity than Arizona on their side of the region. But nothing would surprise me. This feels like last year's South, the one that gave us Florida Atlantic to me.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about that in DFS, when everybody's projection or everybody's likelihood is around the same range, you obviously want to be going to the lower owned ones. But yeah, in smaller pools, Arizona seems pretty strong to me there, considering they are the favorite and probably won't be picked as such. All right. Oh, you mentioned North Carolina. I did want to say, I saw North Carolina play North Carolina State, one of the few college basketball games that I watched a lot of. That kid on North Carolina State, man, reminded me so much of a mix between like Tractor Trailer, who I loved, and Glenn Big Baby Davis, who I loved also, man. But,
DJ Horn, baby.
Yeah, love that kid. That was fun. Okay, but North Carolina did not look great in that game for my very expert college basketball opinion, of course. Okay. People need to pick. They've listened this whole time. They want to pick to win it. It can be a favorite. It can be contrarian. It can be whatever you want. I'll go first, actually. You know what? I'll go first. I'll go. I don't want anybody to take mine. Creighton has played one of the toughest schedules this year. I think people think they are a small school. When it comes to basketball, they are not. I mean, they are an absolute powerhouse. It's not like a mid-major situation. They have Purdue in their bracket. They have Tennessee in their bracket. Beyond that, I don't think that there is much of a threat. And so I'll go with Creighton to come out of the Midwest and eventually win it all as a quote-unquote mid-major that really isn't. Contrarian play on Creighton, which pains me because I kind of like Purdue too. So I might have to enter more than one pool, but we'll see. We'll see what the pick percentages are. All right. Jason, I give you the floor for your pick to win it.
Man, I'm going to be boring. We haven't had a repeat national championship since Florida in 07. Honestly, and we know the 1 seeds did poorly last year, and I don't know that they're the best pick in all bracket pools, but I would take UConn. I do think they're a cut above. I have more question marks at full strength on Purdue. They're 4-4 in games with a 20% turnover rate, which was their bugaboo last year. And I think as you get deeper into the tournament, you're going to face teams that can somewhat neutralize Edey somewhat with size enough, and B, can turn Purdue over. And so that concerns me there. Houston, the Roberts injury concerns me. So I think all these things are pushing me more toward UConn. And then on the other side, maybe a Big East finally. You mentioned Creighton or Marquette. Marquette, obviously high variance, but has the kind of style and at full strength. I think they played well without Kolek relatively until UConn exposed them. Obviously, he's a huge factor, but I think this is a good team. This is just a good team, and they're probably going to be undervalued. And I think in some pools, you take a team like Marquette, like if with 30 people in it, they may not be picked as champ. You may be able to take like a UConn versus Marquette and basically buy a champ ticket on both because you might have them going as far as anybody else. And so you may want to pool that way, even if UConn does end up losing. So I'm thinking along those lines.
All right. Big East heavy for Mr. Lisk. Alex, your pick to win it all.
Yeah, boring as well. UConn. They've only lost one game with their current starting five, and that was a true road game at Creighton a couple weeks ago where they shot 3 for 16 from three, and Creighton couldn't miss. So I think UConn is well equipped to handle a lot of different types of games. They have different. They have a pretty deep team. They can play different types of games, whereas I think Purdue, Houston, they're kind of set in how they play. And UConn can probably sustain losing an injury to one of their key players more so than any other team. So I think they have the depth. Klingen's an absolute monster inside. Like guys cannot score on him in the post. I think this UConn team's prime for a repeat. So I'll go UConn.
Repeat. All right, Jack, your pick to win it.
Yeah, I think UConn is the pick to win it in a vacuum. But based on the percentages versus, you know, they have like a 20% implied probability. I think that their ownership could come in over 20. So I'll go with Purdue here. I do recognize the idea that with the way Edie gets officiated, especially, maybe that there's some fragility there. But I think the narrative on them is so strong and all the numbers love them. So I think that they're going to come in pretty underowned. So I'm going Purdue here.
I like that, man. I mean, just as someone who knows nothing about the game, this team played the hardest schedule in the entire nation, lost 4 games, and now people don't want to pick them to win it. I don't know. If they come in like, I don't know, what would be really low, like 6% of people picking Purdue to win it, or like 7% of people to win it? I think Purdue is probably pretty good winner there, just from a straight game theory perspective. All right, we've said it all on March Madness. Be sure to head to establishtheRun.com for more info on our March Madness product. Again, that is fantasy DFS props. For your bracket needs, head to poolgenius.com/ETR. Be sure to check that out. Always super sharp data from the guys over at Pool Genius and Team Rankings. Check the show notes for more links there. For Jason. For Jack. For Alex, good luck in the tournament. I am Adam.